Hi everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to share with you my favorite way to preserve beans. Hi, my name's Corinne, and here at Spirea, I share videos that weave together plant wisdom, holistic health, self-sufficiency with just a dash of magic. If this sounds interesting to you, I'd love for you to stick around. So fermentation is quickly becoming one of my favorite ways to preserve foods, and this is for a few reasons. Of course, one, the health benefits are absolutely amazing. When you lacto-ferment your food, what ends up happening is you create beneficial gut bacteria known as probiotics as a byproduct of the fermentation process. Now, I've mentioned this in some past videos before. The lacto actually refers to lactobacillus bacteria and not lacto as in milk. So there is no dairy in any of these recipes that I share or this recipe that I'm sharing unless it's specifically called for. Sometimes when we're fermenting things like fruit, and I have a great video on fermenting cherries and I'll post that up here. If you're interested in fermenting some fruits, you may need a culture to jumpstart it, and things like whey are traditionally used. So then in those cases, you'll have dairy, but it's actually referring to the bacteria that you're creating. Now, the second reason I really like fermentation as a method of preservation is what happens when you have something like this. You have vegetables that just trickle in. I'm not going to heat up my kitchen and get the water bath canner out to make a small batch of canned dill beans. Whereas with fermentation, I can make little micro batches as I go. So it's perfect for a small family homestead like we have to preserve our crops. Now, of course, I really do love freezing as well. We do actually freeze a lot of our green beans, but we actually just had some of our first batch of fermented dilly beans for lunch today, and they are absolutely delicious. They maintain their crunch, they're nice and salty. And what's really cool about fermentation, again, because it's not like canning and you will be storing your finished product in the fridge, you can tinker with spices all you want, which is kind of a cool part. So for this recipe, you're obviously going to need some beans. You're going to need spices of your choosing. Today, I'm going to be using some garlic. We actually just harvested our garlic yesterday. And we have some of the bulbs that were a bit smaller, so we saved some of the small cloves for fermenting. I'm going to be using mustard seed today, a pinch of red pepper flakes, and some dill seed. But you can use whatever you want. If you really like black pepper, or if you just want to do mustard seeds because you really enjoy that flavor, or maybe you want it to be really, really spicy and just use red pepper flakes, really, there's no wrong way to do this. So whenever you're making fermented foods, with the exception of sauerkraut, and I do have a video for that as well, so I'll link that up here, you're gonna need a brine or a salt water solution when fermenting your veggies. Now, I had 2 cups already in the fridge of a salt water solution because we ferment so many vegetables. I sometimes have leftover brine. I don't like to waste anything, so we throw it in a mason jar and put it in the fridge for future use. So I already had 2 cups of brine. I added an additional 2 cups of good, clean drinking water. You cannot use chlorinated or fluorinated water. The chlorine specifically in your water will kill and prevent any bacteria growth. We actually want healthy gut bacteria to form in our fermented foods. So you're gonna have to get spring water or have a filtration system that removes that chlorine. So you're gonna need good, clean drinking water, and you're gonna need an unrefined salt of some kind. If you're in the United States, I hear amazing things about Redmond sea salt. Lots of people like to use Himalayan sea salt, or in this case, I have an unrefined plain sea salt. Now, your basic brine is 1 teaspoon of salt for every cup of water. Now, this is for things like beans, crops that do not have a lot of water in them themselves. If you're going to be fermenting something like pickles, I'm actually going to be doing some pickles after this. They've got a lot of water in them, so you may have to add up to 1.5 to 2 teaspoons of salt per cup of water. But because we're doing beans today, I'm gonna add an additional 2 teaspoons to this. Now, sometimes it does help if your water is warm, just to help to get the salt to dissolve. Now again, remember, I'm only adding 2 teaspoons because I already had 2 cups of finished salt solution. So I'm just going to give that a good whisk until all the salt dissolves. And then my brine is ready for my fermented dilly beans. So now that my saltwater solution is ready for my ferment, the next thing I'm going to do is prep my beans. There's really not a lot you have to do in this department. I just like to cut or snap off the stem portion, and that's really all you need to do. You know, obviously give them a good wash or something like that first. So I'm just going to snap these off. Now I'm using a 1 liter jar to do this today. So, and you know what, little round ones in there, I'm just going to shove them in the jar. It's no problem. So you may have to, depending on the size of your jar, you might have to cut a little bit of the bean in order for it to fit in the jar. I'll do that once I have all of my other equipment prepping or prepped. So what I have in my sink right now are 1 liter mason jars that are filled with boiling water just to make sure they're nice and sterilized. And I also have my pickle pebbles and pickle pipe, which I'll show you in the next segment once I'm done prepping all my beans. Alrighty, so in terms of equipment, really the only thing you need is a jar. Now I have the Mason Tops fermentation system. I absolutely love it. I will post links for them below because it does make the fermentation process so much easier, almost foolproof. So the first thing that I have is something known as a pickle pebble, and it's a glass fermentation weight. And the job of this little guy is to ensure that your vegetables stay below the brine, because anything that floats up above the brine is susceptible to mold and bacteria, the not good bacteria in your ferments. So that weight goes on top of the vegetables to make sure they stay below the brine. The second part of the system is known as a pickle pipe. And I'd like to have my husband, zoom in, because you'll see it has a little opening on the top. So the purpose of this little sucker is it sits on top of your jar. Once it's all filled, you screw it on. And what this does is it prevents any foreign bacteria from entering your ferments, but at the same time allowing the carbon dioxide, which is a byproduct of the fermentation process, to escape. Now, if you do not have a fermentation lid like this, it's totally fine. You can use a regular mason jar lid. You just have to ensure that you burp your ferments at least once a day. So you just want to crack that lid open to allow the gas to escape, because if you let it go 2 or 3 days, the results could actually be explosive. So what I'm going to get to now is adding in my spices into my jar. Now here is where you can customize based on the things that you like and the flavors that you enjoy. I'm going to put in about 4 cloves of garlic, but they're pretty small. Normally I would only do about 2 regular size, but because these were our little guys we pulled yesterday, I'm going to put in 4. I'm going to put a full teaspoon of dill seed because we absolutely love that dill flavor. I'm going to put in a full teaspoon, maybe about a half a teaspoon of mustard seed as well. And then I'm going to add in about a pinch of red pepper flakes to give it some heat. Now, if you have fresh dill, mine is just starting to flower and I'm saving it all because we're actually canning dill pickles this weekend. You could add fresh dill in here as well. And then all you're going to do is start packing the beans into your jar. Now, I like to try to have them sort of be upright, but it may not work out that way. In general, for every quart or 1 liter size jar, you're going to need about 1 pound or 453 grams of vegetables. I think that's the right conversion. If I got it wrong, I'll make sure I add it in text on the video. So you're just going to tuck your veggies in there, packing in as much as you can. And like I said, if some of my beans are a little bit long, I may have to go in with a knife and cut them so they'll fit, because you want to leave at least a good inch of space at the top, enough room for your fermentation weight if you're using one, or just enough room for the brine to fill in the jar. So I'll get to packing these up and I'll let you know the next step of the process in just a minute. All right, so my jar is stuffed full of beans, and of course all my spices are in here. Now you can add them at this point too. So again, fermentation is really forgiving. At this point, I actually like to put my weight in now because I've been splashed in the face with salt water too many times trying to add it in afterwards. So I have my weight here. This is going to keep the beans and everything below the brine. And then all you do is pour your salt water solution. So again, this was 1 teaspoon for every cup of water. If you're doing vegetables that have a lot of moisture, things like zucchinis, pickles, peppers, you're going to need to use more salt. So I'm just filling this up with water here. It's going to use almost the full 4 cups. I like to fill it up above the fermentation weight just to make sure. From here, I put on my pickle pipe. I screw my lid on and I'm done. I didn't heat up my kitchen. I didn't have to break out my canner, and I've got a beautiful jar of, well, they're not fermented yet, but they will be fermented dilly beans. Now you're going to want these to sit on the counter or in a cool, dark location. I've always had them out on the counter with no problem for about 2 weeks. Check them in 2 weeks. See if you like the flavor. I also will sometimes crack the lid open just to ensure that there isn't any funky mold growth or anything like that. I'll do that maybe once or twice a week just to be sure. But most of the time I've had really, really great success with ferments. So you can keep this on the counter for up to 4 weeks. So between 2 and 4 weeks. We usually like to take them off after about 2 weeks. Then all you'll do is you'll take out your weight. You'll replace your pickle pipe with a regular mason jar lid. A plastic one, actually, I find works better because the salt will start to erode that metal. And then you tuck them in the fridge and enjoy them as a side to your meals. You can add them to salads. Really, they're quite delicious. So there you have it, folks. One of my favorite ways to preserve green beans or beans of any kind. Now, if you have any questions, comments, questions about fermentation in general, I encourage you to leave those in the comments below. I also encourage you to check out my fermentation playlist because I have quite a few fermented veggie dishes and things that you can play with if this is something that you really want to add into your diet. Remember, fermented foods are loaded with healthy gut bacteria and actually are more bioavailable for things like B vitamins. So that just means that you're going to get more nutrition from your food. The only downside with fermented foods, at least for us, is that we have to store them in the fridge. If you have a nice, cool root cellar that stays around fridge temperature, you can store them down there, no problem. We don't have a basement, so for us, we actually have an entire row in our fridge that's dedicated to fermented veggies. Like I said, if you've got any questions, leave those below. And until next time, this is Corinne from Spirea Herbs, wishing you health and wellness.